Hi, welcome to Word Up. My name is Pastor Sheena Cameron,
And I'm Reverend Gerald Cameron.
and this is Word Up, a community where preachers grow. Today we are going to do the lectionary New Testament text, and that is found in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 1 through 14. We just want to remind you we're not going to read the text in its entirety, but we are going to extrapolate some of the more important scriptures and give you some focal points for preaching.
One of the things I love about Second Timothy is its context. So in First Timothy, we see that the church of Ephesus specifically, is going through a time of trial and tribulation, both internally and politically. And internally, as we see in First Timothy chapter 1, there's this internal conflict in terms of teachers and false teachers and false prophets. And there's this sense of urgency that Paul has in writing Timothy, this young pastor, just about what is going on in the church and words of encouragement. Second Timothy, what's so interesting about this particular book is that it's much more personal. There's this sense of apprenticeship type of language that is in this text, and it's much more of a personal connection, as you can see the deep relationship between both Paul and Timothy, as Paul's writing to this young pastor who in this season is just finding trial after trial after trial after trial. And Paul is writing this while in prison for just simply sharing the gospel. And it's just a beautiful, when you read this text and when you're planning, if you're going to preach this text, to just think about the context of this letter being written in a prison cell to a young pastor who is pastoring in a time of just chaos, both internally in the church and externally through the politics of the day. And there's a lot of remnants of what we see today in today's church. And so this text is so relevant to what's going on, but I think it preaches to who we are called to be as the church. And so I really enjoy the context in which Paul is writing.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that really stands out is right in the beginning, in verse 5, when he's saying that the sincere faith that your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice have taught you. And one of the things that's interesting about Timothy that maybe some of us resonate with is that Timothy's father was a Gentile and his mother was a Jew. So in a typical family setting in antiquity, it would have been his father's responsibility to teach him the ways of the Lord, to teach him the law, to teach him the prophets, the writings, etc. But since his father was not capable of doing that from a standpoint of he would be a learner as well, it was his mother's side of the family who was rearing him in the things that he needed in terms of what it meant to be raised in the word. And obviously the Hebrew Bible was the only Bible that they had, and what that meant to accept Christ and live that faith out. And so when we see this conflict, as you mentioned in the first letter to Timothy, with I suffer your women not, everybody hangs their hat on I suffer your women not to teach, I suffer your women not to preach and teach over men particularly. We have to really wrestle with that in terms of the inconsistencies. And I think as clergy, it is befitting to us to own and to wrestle with the notion that if Paul is truly the author of 1st and 2nd Timothy, there's going to be debate about that. Whether or not Paul is the author of 1st and 2nd Timothy, we can see inconsistencies in the role of women and the ways in which those roles are carried out, especially when it comes to order, if you will, in the church. And so I think for me, what this reminds me of is if he is going into the congregation and he's literally stirring up the gift, he's rekindling a flame that was already there. He's doing it holding in tandem that which his grandmother and mother taught him. And so I think that what we have to understand is, although we don't agree with the nuances, we don't agree with the fact that on one hand women are to keep silent, on the other hand women are empowering young pastors, but I think that to dismiss what we tend to do with the Pauline corpus, we take it all or nothing. I either like Paul or I hate Paul. But I think in order to be maturing in what it means for us to live through and accept this as scripture, I think it means that we cannot just keep what we like and discard what we don't like, because that shows our congregation that if it's something that's uncomfortable about what God does, all we have to do is pretend like we don't deal with it anymore and it goes away. So I think this might not come to a resolve on a Sunday morning. It may not ever come to a resolve, but to be honest about the fact that skipping 1st and 2nd Timothy, or even Titus, any of the pastorals, skipping the pastorals, if you're a pastor with instructions to the church, is actually just doing a disservice to your congregation, and it is showing them that you're unwilling to challenge yourself.
Definitely. And there's a couple of things, if you do decide to preach this text this week, that we've identified that I think are helpful and beneficial. While at face value this may seem as just a letter to a pastor, there are so many implications to how to communicate this to a church at large. One thing that comes to mind in this text is this sense of gratitude. So as my wife shared, this sense of calling Timothy to remember the faith of his grandmother and mother, and to look at that in terms of what is going on around him, I think is important to help our members to remember, and to help them remember and to give thanks for those in the past who have encouraged them to go on. And while in this in this text, as Timothy is reading a letter by Paul himself is encouraging Timothy to continue. So this sense of gratitude that Paul has toward Timothy, and the gratitude that Paul is calling Timothy to have towards his parents, I think is a thing that is important in this text. Another thing that we see is the theme of pressing on. And the theme of continuing to go on in the face of difficulty, and what it means to look at the ultimate goal of showing Christ over all that is going on around you. And ministry is difficult, not just for pastors, but ministry is difficult for laity, especially if your church has a lot of volunteer laity that do things. Ministry is labor intensive, and it requires a lot of things that you say no to. And so this text, I think, is important as you talk to your congregation, or if you want to preach this, about what does it mean to continue to go on even when times are difficult, and when you don't see the results that you thought you would see, but it's manifested in different ways. And so how to press on in the face of in the face of uncertainty. So those are just a couple of themes. I don't know if you saw anything else in there that you may want to share.
No, I think that's good, because when you're talking about parents and grandparents, many of our congregations, they are parents, they are grandparents. So I think that pressing on in that acknowledgement is something that if nothing else speaks to them, I think that will. So thank you so much for your closing comments, and we thank you so much for visiting us here at Word Up. We ask that you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Please. We ask that you share this with someone who you might think will find this helpful. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
It's his word up, a community where preachers grow.